Okay. Well, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Philip Kalansis Cope. I'm the Chief Social Scientist of Common Ground Research Networks. It's a great honor to finally be here. We had talked about this conference on a beach in Greece 3 years ago, and we had a great vision and a great plan of why it was important to come here, why it's important for us to keep pushing the boundaries and context for understanding the world that we're in today. And that was a world that seems so far away now. And so it's been a great honor working with the University of Curacao. I would like to thank Lisa, who has been the anchor for all these years. We've had 2 years of programming. I don't think she realized when we started that it was going to be 2 years. We had a wonderful online conference last year, and I am really happy that we committed to being here in person this year. I would like to thank the Dean of the faculty, Dr. Komen, for her generosity and her intellectual commitment to this event as well. I'd like to thank the ICT team behind us for 2 years. You know, so many people have been working so hard in these transitions to move online, and I'm sure they've done a tremendous job here at this institution, and we're really grateful for the work that they have done. Campus catering, everyone here, thank you so much for the work that you have done to bring us together. The Curacao Tourism Board and the Madro and Curiel Bank. Have I got that close to being right? Yes, great. I'm going to talk a little bit about the theme and the format and what we're going to do later. But first, it is my distinct honor to bring to the stage the rector of this university, Dr. Francis Delanoy. Not only is he a stellar administrator, but he's a researcher in organizational studies himself. So having that balance of scholarly commitments and practical know-how is a rare combination. And so it's a great pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Phil. Good morning. Bon dia. Finally, we are here together. That's great. Like Dr. Phil just mentioned, we were preparing this for almost 3 years, and we have started the conversation about having this conference here in Curacao. And finally, you know the facts, 2019, 2020, etc., about the COVID. But nevertheless, today we are here in Curacao, and I'm hoping that you are enjoying your stay on the island. Is it? Okay, that's great. So as we say in our native language, Papiamento, bon dia, bombini na Curacao, bombini na Universidad de Curacao. Okay, I'm very pleased to greet you in person today on our wonderful island, Curacao, especially also our viewers. After more than 3 years of online meetings and conversations, finally we managed to have a large group of participants here in our island. I'm sure that the ones that couldn't make it to Curacao will be definitely next time when the conference is being held in Curacao, they will be present. I'm sure the word of mouth will be going on. I can assure you about that. Today, I want to begin expressing my appreciation for the Diversity Organizations Communications Nations Research Network for having chosen Curacao and our university for the second year to host this important conference. Special thanks goes to Dr. Bielko, Dr. Eugenia Arvantis, Dr. Tatiana Portnova, and of course, Dr. Phil. And our own colleague, Ms. Lisa Chong. A round of applause, please, for these people, because they have invested a lot of time to have this on the island. The COVID pandemic has kept us until the last months in suspense, but luckily, The statistics in Curacao are at such extent that it was responsible to travel to Curacao and to attend this conference in person. However, despite that the global community is still facing and dealing with the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially the post-COVID has its challenges, the team managed to organize the 2.5-day conference with great speakers on interesting topics. Nevertheless, we must continue to take care and take the necessary precautions during the conference, and so that you can stay healthy and safe on our island. The local organizing committee has prepared a very interesting program, and during these conference days, we want you to meet our people, experience the diversity on our island, the inclusiveness of our island, and especially explore the island, the beaches, the culture, and the food. We have organized also a cultural evening where you can, exchange in an informal setting conversations with others. The theme of this 22nd hybrid conference is rethinking the local who, how, why. This is a very broad subject and can be approached from different perspectives and angles. As mentioned in the conference program, the idea of having such a broad subject is to raise the big picture questions on local interdisciplinary responses to the effect of diversity in social change and collaborative knowledge learning production. The central theme is well chosen as intellectual interaction and imagination of a scale of alternative thoughts and suggestions, especially in this post-COVID period. The question that I want to raise here is, as we are currently living in a new normal, can we speak about a local nowadays? During the pandemic, the unthinkable became a fact. We were forced to come up with innovative and out-of-the-box solutions to continue living and to survive. Communication at a global level, international interactions increased during the pandemic. From an international perspective, development of economies, interactions between countries, and development of digital communication and traffic have also contributed to diversity, as people have been given the choice where to live and where to do their business. Curacao was not excluded from this international development. The diversity of our society is a fact. However, globalization and in particular increasing migration have added an ethnic cultural dimension to diversity, especially on our island. We have experienced a move from multiculturalism and multilingualism to transculturalism and translingualism due to the huge interaction between different cultures that came together during and after the pandemic. And we have embraced it. So that's why I really appreciate that this conference be held in Curacao to expand the local and international knowledge on the importance of inclusiveness. And it's also in this perspective that I consider this conference on diversity and organizations, communities and nations, a very important one, as presentations and papers will be presented and discussions will be going on and new innovative ideas can be emerged. What's the new reality? Rethinking the local who, how, why, linking this question to the present situation of the war between Ukraine and Russia, what do we expect the answer to be? As countries, we are in the process of recovering from health, economic, and humanitarian crisis triggered by the COVID-19. Unexpectedly, we were unpleasantly surprised by the rising tension between Ukraine and Russia. The situation escalated, and now we all know the facts. The consequence of this war resulted in another global problem, as a drastic increase in prices of commodities, products, transportation, etc., was noted, causing a huge inflation figures and financial challenges for both business and households, meaning that the process of inclusion may be jeopardized. Is this the aftermath of the pandemic? Is there some kind of invisible, unnoticeable side effect of the COVID virus that affected our thinking? I'm asking those questions. I'm asking this as we are experiencing that a country doesn't respect the sovereignty of another one and decides beyond all norms and rules to start the process of hostile takeover. Another point is that people are still being discriminated based on ethnicity, color of the skin, social status, religion, gender, etc. Another thinking is the beliefs and organization exists about white supremacy. What about that? Climate changes, gender neutral ideas, political dictators, poverty, etc., etc. You can mention a lot that may be obstructing factors towards what we are aiming at. So rethinking the local here, other questions are, who will be impacted? How will he or she be impacted? And why will she or he be impacted? I'm sure that this question will go on during the presentation. So a lot has been said about the new normal, and I believe one of the things that is obvious is that interconnectivity and interdependency in the global economy is important and will remain important. The local is being influenced by global forces and developments, and it will be very difficult to give a firm answer to this, but I'm sure that we are in the process. So, to conclude my introduction this morning, I will finish with a recommendation for the educational sector. We are living in an unframed world where people tend to have the freedom to do whatever they want to do without respecting each other. The events of the last 3 years until now have made a great impact on how we are experiencing life today. Nevertheless, it's important to acknowledge the respect and the right for freedom and equal treatment. Following that, with an inclusive and equitable equality, education, and lifelong learning opportunities for all, countries will succeed in achieving equality, inclusion, and breaking the cycle of poverty that is leaving children, youth, adults, and everyone behind. So, thank you again for choosing Curacao and our university for this conference. I wish you all a successful conference, and I look forward to the presentations and the interactions, and enjoy your stay on the island and come back next year or whenever it will be. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. So we've been doing this now for 22 years. I just had to check. You know, I think we've all lost a little track of time this period, but it feels like we're starting again. It feels like it's the first time, and you know that presents us with such a kind of wonderful opportunity to rethink our purpose, to rethink who we are as researchers, as scholars, as for us at Common Ground Research Networks, builders of scholarly communication technology as well. When the pandemic first hit, you know, we really wanted to go back and, you know, think about, you know, what the future of the scholarly conference could be, what might it be. There have been so many barriers to access that have been persistent, that predated COVID: accessibility, affordability, pressures in institutions, funding cuts, a whole range of things that have meant it's a complicated landscape. And this was an example of many industries, of many things, all of the undercurrents that were already there didn't leave, but in many ways became enlarged. And so what we thought about was, how do we build a platform? How do we build a tool that is a resource that considers diversity, that considers access, and considers legacy information hubs that people can come back to. And so what we did is, with our Scholar platform, is we built this event microsite. It's a work in progress. But what we have done is that everyone who's a presenter here, we have asked, each person has a presenter page, whether they're in person or online, and we've asked them to upload digital content. I'm asking you to. You can do it after the conference itself. And in that way, we are building a collective time capsule of what happened in this space, something that you can come back to, but also a rich resource that online delegates can engage with as well. One of the other principles that we had for the online content is that what we felt through these 2 years is that time zones are a boundary. Time zones are exclusionary. So all of the online content which you'll see in the event site is asynchronous. So what I encourage you to do is, and while we're forcing you into this program, well, 2 reasons. We will never have a printed program again. Because what an environmental disaster it was to begin with. And we will be doing a proceedings book, which has everyone's abstract at the end, which is a more valuable resource. But what we want to do is to guide you into this event site. There are discussion boards for all of you in person and online. Engage with the content, comment. You all have your profile pages in there. And our goal was not just to build a temporary shelter for COVID, but to really build an infrastructure for this research network and community that builds a valuable resource over time. I'd like to welcome our online delegates. If you're signed in online or whenever you'll be watching this, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. It's wonderful to have you here. As of today, we have 100 pieces of digital content online, which is a fantastic thing. And I really encourage you to look at that resource. The other thing that we did is we knew groups would be small. It's such a challenging environment right now. I have to commend all of you for the bravery. It is a brave thing to get out here, to be here. So give yourself a round of applause. I'll give you a round of applause. It really is a big thing, we're all brave, tough people, but we all have to recognize that that these little acts of courage is how we come back as a society. And when we think of this theme, what is the local? What is the scale? What are these principles of ethical concern that we have? These have been so disrupted in a certain way, or all of the cracks of understanding our connections have become wider in a certain sense. So when we're thinking about how we get these people, these brave souls in front of me right now in person, what is the future of this experience is we want to make sure that you connect in as many ways as possible with local experiences, with local people, local researchers. And the team here in Curacao has got a wonderful experience for us all. I encourage you to make the most of all of it. We'll have a welcome reception this evening here at the venue, which I'm very excited by. We have a case study day tomorrow. One of the things that we are really committed to is, getting researchers out of these rooms and into spaces where life happens, and to think about research within that context. It's very important to us. We have a wonderful day planned tomorrow with, there's an information sheet about that. I won't go through it right now, but we'll be meeting here. We'll be in a bus together, discovering revitalization and sustainability sites here in Curacao, and they'll be coming back for lunch and having a panel to discuss those that day. We also have a conference dinner tomorrow night, which has been generously sponsored by the Madru and Kareel Bank. I probably got it worse this time, but I thank them for that. And really, I would like to see as many of you there as possible. Some little format stuff for those of you who haven't been to this conference before, which I'd like to draw your attention to. After the plenary sessions, we have a garden conversation. That's what we call it. That's what we did call it pre-pandemic. We're trying to work out what that means now when we need to be online. It usually is in a garden, so we can have an informal kind of chat, but we've decided to do it inside this room for a whole range of technical reasons. So the question and answer for the garden conversation will be in this room, just so you know. After that, we have another session type, which are our talking circles. And the talking circles are really just a space for you to come together and introduce yourself based on research topics. You'll see that all the rooms are assigned by one of the themes of the conference. And I encourage you just to go into that room, introduce yourself, say who you are, where you've come from, and your area of research. It's a really wonderful way to make those personal connections, those professional connections, and those research connections. Another group of people who I really want to make the effort to recognize are our emerging scholars. Could our emerging scholars please stand for 1 second? Okay, give them a round of applause. Could you stay standing for 1 second? So this is a really important program for us. Yes, okay, you can sit. This is an important program for us. The emerging scholars apply for this position. We had a great pool of applicants this year. And what their role is, on one hand, it's a great professional development experience. We put them in the front of the rooms to chair and to guide conversations. But really, it's not just a practical role, but it's our commitment to making sure that emerging scholars are in the front of the rooms, their voices are heard, and that they find a way to make real deep connections. So that's a really important thing to us. Well, I'd also like to recognize our brave Spanish language group. We'll give them a round of applause too. Not only are we blended, but we are bilingual. So you'll see in the conference program, you can change to the Spanish language sessions, and please feel we're all one community here. So that is really wonderful. The other parts that I just briefly want to run through just while I have you is that the conference is just one part of what this research network does. We have a journal collection in English and a Spanish language journal as well. We really encourage you to submit your research to these journals. Our philosophy around peer review is to kind of break the kind of vertical power dynamic of the editor and the editorial board. We love our board, we love our editors, but what's really important to us is that the people within the community validates the research that is produced by that community. So if you do submit, we then find your expertise and we ask you to do the peer review of 2 other works. In that way, it's our research. You also have access to the journal collections, its whole backlist. It's, as probably everyone around you has said, don't cite yourself. We can do it once or twice, but generally it's a naughty thing to do. But we can cite each other. And this is a wonderful resource of 20 plus years of researchers like you here. And I really encourage you to access that resource and submit to our journals. We also have a wonderful book series as well. So if there is a book on the tip of your tongue that you would like to get out to the world, we would love to be the advocates of that too. So I think that's my introduction. So thank you again for all being here. You are the first class of a new world, and you should feel the strength of that. So thank you, and thank you. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to switch gears now, and I'm going to introduce our 2 keynote speakers for this morning. I think, Guy, you also presented last year, right? Yeah, so you're a 2-time Curacao keynote speaker. But yeah, so we have Rose Mary Allen. She is a Curacaoan anthropologist who was published on the oral history of the former enslaved people of the Dutch Caribbean islands. Her dissertation, I'm going to try it, Diki Manera is a social history of Afro-Curacaoans from 1863 to 1917, and it draws of largely a collection of oral histories of Afro-Curacaoans. She holds a PhD and is a lecturer at the University of Curacao, and in 2015 she was awarded a knighthood in the Order of Orange Nassau by the Netherlands, and she also won the Cola de Broer Prize. Our second plenary speaker, Guy Kalansis. Okay. Thank you. Look, I'm going to ask you to pronounce Kalansis Cope after this. So he's an economist with experience in insurance, banking, pension fund, business services, and government industry. As an entrepreneur and advisor, he's involved in issues and challenges around economic and social development, sustainability, resilience, and life. He's a writer himself, and was a member of the COVID emergency fund in Curacao. I say was as hope, was his hope. So yes, it's with great pleasure that I introduce both of you. Lisa, who will be going first? How will we be doing this? I should have asked this question. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Bon dia, bon tardi, for those who are listening outside of the island. I sent in a PowerPoint, but I don't seem to see it, but I can. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay. Okay. As you see, the title of my paper is The Parameters of National Belonging and Non-Belonging Within the Context of Cultural Diversity in the Caribbean Society of Curacao. And I placed my presentation within the theme of this conference plenary session on rethinking the local who, how, and why. And I will look at how identity and national belonging in Curacao are entangled with various local, national, and global processes. Interestingly, as I was preparing this paper, a heated discussion emerged on the island about the COHO, which is the Dutch acronym for Caribbean Identity for Reform and Development. It is the Dutch government's response to the request from the government of Curacao, but also St. Martin and Aruba for financial assistance, legality support to help relieve the social and economic problems on the island caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, starting in 2020. Opinions in Curacao regarding the COHO are polarized between those who advocate for it and those who oppose it. The sometimes strongly charged debate on the COHO focus on issues such as autonomy, self-determination, the degree of disentanglement from the mother country, the essence of development, as well as the need for Dutch financial assistance and local government and performance. This set of clashing ideas generally shapes the social and political landscape of the island. At first glance, they appear to be matters of an administrative and legal nature, but upon closer look, closer inspection, they seem to represent an arena in which muted tension about nationhood, belonging, rootedness, togetherness, loyalty, and trust are being played out. As they become threatening, articulated, and even politicized, they provide a valuable lens through which one may glean how people judge and value personal and collective identities, negotiate national belonging, and shape national identity. For the purpose of this present paper, I would like to address how national belonging has been conceptualized and played out in the Dutch Caribbean Society of Curacao across time, particularly during periods when it became especially contested or challenged. In doing so, I will also explore how belonging have been expressed through nationalistic performance and popular cultural expression of the island. This paper draws from more than a decade of research connecting the historical discourse on identity and belonging with popular culture in Curacao. Central in this paper are the concept of belonging and identification. Both have the subjective dimension of being part of a nation or other collectivity based upon committed, loyal, personal, and intimate feeling of pertaining. They are constructed through contested narratives and discourse on cultural distinction, social demarcation, and political border making, by which people claim, justify, or even resist membership across time and geographical space. The essentialist common notion of belonging claims that identity is stable, coherent, and even controllable and predictable, but it provides little insight into the dynamic of identity as actually constructed and continually reconstructed, whereby know-how, language, tradition, heritage, aesthetic norms and values, and custom are used both to include and exclude. To belong, therefore, places people between the continuous play of history, culture, and power, framed within the nature of a seemingly stable collective embrace of the value that groups of people place upon their life, environment, and reality, and which they use to distinguish themselves from other collectivities. In the Caribbean, belonging and identity are often interlinked. Identity in the sense of the search for the individual, as well as the collective self, has been an issue of scholarly focus for a long time. Stuart Hall, one of the leading experts on Caribbean culture, notes that in the identity and a sense of belonging has always presenting themselves as challenges to Caribbean people, and therefore has been focal points for writers, politicians, civic leaders, artists, as well as scholars. For most Caribbean nations, the constructing of identity has been tied to a greater or lesser degree to the search of political independence or autonomy and economic self-sufficiency, development, and survival. And this has involved a politics of belonging, which Naira Yuval Davis defined as specific political project aimed at constructing belonging to particular collectivities that are, at the same time, themselves being constructed in this project in very particular way. Identity has gained much scholarly attention from Caribbean anthropologists and other Caribbeanists in relation to nationalism, national belonging, independence, cultural heritage, colonialism, and post-colonialism, as the study of Kala's slogan and Deborah Thomas shows. Meanwhile, Yarimir Bonilla has linked non-sovereignty with nationalism and constitutional reform in her work on the non-sovereign island of Puerto Rico and the French Antilles. Bonilla helps us to understand that in non-sovereign Caribbean nation, the dynamic of belonging to a colonial mother country must not be viewed in terms of pathology and lack of agency. Instead, Bonilla portrayed the complex way in which people navigate conflicting norms and desires as they are exposed to multidirectional and transnational cultural flow. For her, non-sovereign Caribbean nation displayed the capacity to respond and adapt to other organizing principles of governance and to trouble the fiction on sovereign control as they negotiate and navigate forms of entanglement that cannot or perhaps should not be easily broken, as she states in her publication. Curacao and the other Dutch Caribbean islands are non-sovereign, albeit in ways different from Puerto Rico, and maintaining a relationship with the European metropole is not so clear-cut for Curacao as it might seem for the French Antilles. Bonilla's work has stimulated cross-cultural and cross-regional comparative analysis and have helped to enrich the discourse concerning the negotiation, claiming and construction of identity in the Caribbean as a whole. For example, I might mention the recent volume edited by Yvonne van der Pijl and Fransje Guadeloupe entitled Equal Liberty in the Dutch Caribbean, Ways of Being Non-Sovereign, and which look at this matter from a Dutch Caribbean perspective. The Dutch Caribbean island engagement with sovereignty and non-sovereignty, national identity and belonging differs from the rest of the Caribbean, in particular with regards to timing, but also in regards to interesting details. These six islands were historically grouped together in one way or another for the overseas government purpose of the Netherlands. Curacao, the largest of the island and traditionally the center of Dutch colonial rule, has historically enjoyed a position of privilege relative to the others. The 20th century process toward greater self-affirmation and self-realization in the wider Caribbean has also been visible on the Dutch Caribbean island. Aruba and St. Martin increasingly agitated against political dominance, not of the colonial mother country, but of Curacao. In addition, the construction of belonging took place in a context in which the historical wound of colonialism and slavery, with its ethnic and racial dimension, has not yet been completely healed. Because of this, in the defining the collective, we has always been complicated and controversial. Understanding the Dutch Caribbean island's sense of belonging requires learning about the complex, multi-layer and multi-dimensional situation surrounding identity and national belonging in each of these islands. When one zooms in on Curacao, one may discern three moments in its historical evolution when issues of national belonging were played out in the arena of political constitution in a more pronounced way. The first moment concerned the social uprising of the 30th of May, 1969, 15 years after the six islands together gained constitutional autonomy. Constitutional autonomy held much potential for further development. It meant that while the Kingdom of the Netherlands as a whole was responsible for nationality, defense, foreign relations, and cassation, the island were responsible for their own domestic affair. Trinta de Bay, as the 1969 social uprising is known locally, started as a labor strike directly caused by the fact that some workers of the oil refinery, the island main employer at that time, were laid off and sent to work for one of the refinery contractors against lower wage. And the strike grew in size as it soon became to include other protesters. What has begun as a struggle for higher wage turned into a broader demand for recognition and respect. The display of anger and vandalism also revolved around ethnic and racial tension. From a labor conflict, it evolved into a social movement that questioned local social structural imbalance predicated on racial, ethnic, and class hierarchy and contradiction. As illustrated by Ariel Hernandez in a study on the Philippines, cases of violent internal conflict sometimes confront society with identity issues that have not reached a measure of closure. For Hernandez, closure means effectively establishing structural arrangement of social interaction that empower parties to cope with their differences. In the case of Curacao, Trinta de May spoke to social cultural issues and can be seen as an outcome of Curaçao's continuous struggle with a significant colonial legacy, including ethnic division at the individual, institution, and social level. And what we see that in the late 1960s and 1970s, we see a constant negotiation of cultural and national identity, involving questions such as who is included and who is excluded, who has the right to participate, and above all, whose shared heritage and values should count as national ones. Cultural expression through the arts, such as literature, theater, and painting, was an important part of the emerging discourse post-1969. And what you see also in the second half of the 20th century, you see an increasing valorization of heritage, such as Papiamento language. Carnival too was used as a form of expressing heritage. As of 1971, to stimulate broader social engagement and the communication across ethnic and cultural lines. The new approach to Carnival referred explicitly to Trinta de May, as in 1971, the Carnival community envisaged Carnival as a celebration for everyone, a social reapproachment for all groups regardless of their nationality, race, or social position, and very necessary after May 30, 1969. The slogan of 1971 was about national unity. Carnaval pa unitur, ipa unitur. Carnaval for each and everyone, and to unite all. These are a type of expression about the cultural development which has taken place after the 30th May Carnival. You see a very important development of youth culture in the high-flying part, and also the pride of placing on Willemstad, which later in 1971 was placed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. A second moment, that was the first moment, a second moment in which issues of belonging and national identity flared up in Curacao was at the turn of the 21st century, when the cry for constitutional transformation on the island of the Dutch Caribbean became more intense. And several referendums were held, and finally on April 8, 2005, 68% of the Curaçaoan electorate voted to break ties with the other Dutch islands and to become an autonomous country within the Dutch kingdom. The final declaration of 2006 institutionalized kingdom supervision over the public finance of Curacao and St. Martin in exchange for debt relief, as well as measures to improve law enforcement on the island. In practice, the final declaration meant rigorous Dutch supervision of state spending and close Dutch involvement in local law enforcement. And in a final referendum held in Curacao on May 15, 2009, the electorate was asked to accept or reject the ongoing process of constitutional reform, and in particular, the negotiated agreement and proposed legislative measure. And the referendum was preceded by heated discussion on the advantage and disadvantage of the agreement. The result of 52% yes voter approving the agreement and 48 no voters disapproving reflected sharp discord and division on the island, in particular concerning the wish of increased Dutch influence in local affairs. Through this referendum, the different field of power became framed in terms of their opposite claims about recolonization and post-colonialism, and their different view of national belonging, seeking either to secure the existing boundaries or to expand them and to become more integral part of the Dutch kingdom. In the debates leading up to the constitutional reform of 2010, discussion about national identity were never far behind. Curaçaoaness, the Judi Curaçao, and such related issues as belonging, identity, membership, inclusion, and citizenship surface a prominent and much politicized theme. What you see also that cultural policy and nation building clearly shows this process of self-realization. And there was this emphasis on Curaçaoan own culture, what was called Curaçaoan own culture, and as an attempt to confront what is believed outside threat. And the own culture approach came to occupy a central place in the government policy. The direction that culture ought to take was described in several documents. For example, the one Rumbo para Independencia Mental, which already was published in 2001, and which led to the establishment of the Cas de Cultura. The Cas de Cultura promoted what it saw as the development and the emancipation of the population. The government invested increased resources to what it saw as the Simang de Cultura. And the Simang de Cultura perceived broad popular acceptance and grew in importance as public and private organizations, including banks and other multinational corporations, would decorate their offices according to certain custom of what they believe was their own culture. And I have here some of the publications which are mentioned, which look at the form of culture, the importance of culture, nation building, report on nation building, which focus on the issue of who we are or who we want to be. Based on opinion polls, Venedale and Oost-India in this issue speak of a battle between head and heart. The people of the Dutch Caribbean may express the calculated desire to remain part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, whereas their heart may feel otherwise. However, the ongoing discourse suggests that this battle between mind and soul also have to do with one's vision of the self and of the world, a shared sense of vulnerability, alienation within a society that navigates between economic security and financial dependence, and the creation of cultural symbol of a nation, as Marco Grunewald described in a chapter in the book Antillean Heritage, There Lies My Umbilical Cord, Culture Between Insularism and Transnationalism. There is this constant pursuit of emancipation in which people want to use a broader landscape that globalization offers. Also, the role played by the Curaçaoan diaspora in the Netherlands cannot be ignored, especially the role in making certain issues topic of discussion. The third historical moment of significance is the present time and has been shaped by the global COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has been much more than an outbreak of contagious disease, as it had a huge impact on the economy, people's well-being, and other social matters. It has particularly laid bare underlying systematic inequalities and persistent vulnerabilities and injustice that have defined the society for a very long time. Existing economic, cultural, geographical, and historical factors affect how people experience a pandemic. In aftershock of disaster, Puerto Rico before and after the storm, co-authors Yarimar Bonilla and Marisol Lebrun look at how Puerto Rico people were affected by Hurricane Maria, a deadly Category 5 hurricane that devastated that island in September 2017. And they show how natural disaster may deepen the fault line of existing class and ethnic racial differences, as well as colonial history. Something similar may also can be applied to crises such as the pandemic. As stated before, Curacao has interesting political, cultural, social, and economic commonalities with Puerto Rico. The political debate on non-sovereignty in Curacao seems to have parallels with the discussion in Puerto Rico about maintaining their present Commonwealth status versus becoming a state of the USA. Currently, there is this debate in Curacao about the condition that the Netherlands has attached to liquidity support to assist the island in dealing with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I start with in the beginning of my presentation. And I will like to finalize now to give some final thoughts. What I've done in my presentation, I've looked at the ways in Curacao have addressed the challenging issue of national identity and belonging in the late 20th century and early 21st century. And I have focused on three historical moments, which are the Trinity Bay, the constitutional reform of 2010, and the COVID-19 pandemic. And these events have had a significant impact on the politics of national identity and belonging. It is clear that national identity and belonging are bound to resurface from time to time as a matter of contention if they are not addressed effectively and if some degree of closure is not achieved. It will seem that this issue remains relevant to the people of not only sovereign Caribbean state, but non-sovereign Caribbean nation too. However, as a relatively small non-sovereign part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands that had an extended time been somewhat peripheral to the Dutch imperial interests, Curacao is also different, making the study of belonging and national identity challenging, exciting, and potentially rewarding. Local national building policy attempt to deal with the challenges that the societies face in preserving what is believed to be an authentic, traditional, local, or national culture. Traditional culture is celebrated and becomes a way of expressing national belonging in the context of a globalized world, in which identity seems to have become less bounded and fixed and more fluid and flexible. Curacao, like other people all over the world, are redefining their identity in order to cope with this rapid change. And hereby the struggle between mind and soul is very much present. I thank you very much.
PowerPoint. Sorry. I can't see it now. It was hiding. There we go. No, there's no pointer. No, no pointer. So I have to study it. Yes, unfortunately, also for. Yeah, okay. Okay, that's good. That works fine. So a very good morning to everybody. I'm happy to be here, and I'm honored by the invitation of the organization. When you look at me, you have to look at a child, because I'm going to tell you a story from the perspective of a child. And therefore, I'm taking you back to 1975, because in 1975, my second grade teacher told us a story that spurred my imagination. She said, do you know that today you can have breakfast in Paris, take a 6-hour flight, and enjoy lunch in New York? I said by myself, oh my God, this is exciting. And of course, that little voice in my head, we all know what we're talking about here, was spinning around and was saying, wait a moment, so that means when I'm a teenager, then those 6 hours could be reduced to 6 minutes, right? And a couple of years later, those minutes were even reduced to seconds and even fractions of seconds. And why was that? Because in a couple of years later, I saw a science fiction movie, well, series on television, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. And that was about, well, I see some people who recognize it. That's very fine. And that was about a NASA pilot stuck in space for 5 centuries. Can you believe it? And 5 centuries later, he was rediscovered by Earth people, brought back to life, revived. Of course, how else could it be? Because he was the main character. And when he saw back Earth, his planet, his home for the first time, what did he see? He saw a planet recovering from a nuclear war. Everything was gray. There was no green. There were only like clouds, buildings, lots of concrete. And on the other hand, there was that incredible technology that in a split second could bring him from one planet or one galaxy to another. So again, that little voice in my head was thinking, and I asked myself, but why can't we have both? Why can't we have the green, the nature, and the technology together? And another question I asked myself, is that technology for free? So that's how my imagination as a little kid was working. So imagination, I found out, has different meanings. One of the meanings refers to the act of power. And that word, of course, took me because power also have different meanings. And one of the meanings reflects to energy, the energy supply, electricity. And this is where my story is going to focus on. So a couple of things, because I had my context, and as a child doing, well, his research, I had to look to the context that I was having in my mind, but also reflecting on things like, okay, we hear it all the time. Climate change, global warming, greenhouse gases. We're not having any discussion about climate change here, but these things were also set in my mind when I was reading the journals and some articles and so on. And then the question was, okay, what is meant by energy? By the way, when I was thinking about the global average surface of temperature of Earth, what is that? Well, I had to look for that. So I went back to physics. Although I'm an economist, I'm interested in the exact science as well. So what does physics say? Okay, we know there's a beautiful picture of our sun. Without our sun, no energy. The energy of the sun that hits the earth is equal to the energy sent back into space. Can be done by two things, reflection on the one hand or radiation on the other hand. And energy cannot be created out of nothing, nor can it be destroyed. So interesting things to find out. Well, what is physics capable of? Physics is capable through some basic equations to calculate the temperature, the average surface temperature of any planet. So that includes our planets. So on the left side, you see our planet without an atmosphere. On the right side, you see our planet with an atmosphere. That's why the border is a little bit thicker and I gave it a blue color. Imagine that as a thin layer, an atmosphere around the planet. Without an atmosphere, the temperature of our planet, so in absence of an atmosphere, equals minus 19 degrees Celsius. Average, because there will be parts where it's much colder, cooler, and parts where it's warmer. Not really very nice to live on, would you think? And the right side gives the calculation based on an Earth in presence of an atmosphere, and that atmosphere can be considered as, the physicists, they made it a uniform thin layer around the atmosphere, plus 10 degrees. But then in reality, we have also something else, because we have all those weather stations making calculations all over the world. It's like the world is comparted into different segments, and each segment, of course, has different results. You have, for example, weather stations near airports that are near big cities. Okay, these will retrieve different information than, for example, a weather station that somewhere is in the somewhere in the landscape. We know this cities, concrete, higher temperature. When you put it outside on the landscape, it's going to be a cooler temperature. So that all affects the way we are measuring that. But okay, more or less what they agree upon is that based on the observations done by NOAA and other institutions, the average surface temperature of our planet is 14 degrees. So actually, when you compare that to what the physicists calculated based on exact science, that's only a temperature of a difference of 4 degrees. That's quite remarkable. So you see that temperature plus 33 degrees Celsius, that's a difference between if we don't have an atmosphere and if we have an atmosphere. And scientists, they say, okay, that's because of the greenhouse gas effect. In reality, there is a professor, Rancourt, a physicist, he says in reality it's more or less like plus 60 degrees Celsius. And that makes stuff interesting, because if you have those equations, I'm a thirsty person, so as a kid I can say that. I'm going to just drink a little bit. Professor Rancourt, he gave actually a lecture on science and the geopolitics of the climate change. And what he said was this: okay, when we have those equations, now we are able to make a sensitivity analysis. That's the way he calls it. That means if you change something in one of the variables, what is the effect on the outcome on the temperature? Because that's what we want to know. And he said, okay, he made a calculation and he said, I'm going to double the CO2 level, and then I'm going to see what's coming out. What came out? Temperature, average surface temperature of the Earth, increases by 1.4 degrees Celsius. And I was like, what? How can this be? I expected a lot more, of course, because of the narrative I have in my mind. And he said, when you change something in the albedo or the emissivity, and albedo mainly reflects to the reflection, reflects to the reflection. And that means, for example, to give an example, when you have white, fresh snow, yes, a lot of the energy light is going to be reflected, yeah? And the other thing is the emissivity, which reflects mainly to the radiation, yes? For example, a concrete object, yes, will absorb more energy and will have a different radiation than, for example, let's say a grass field, yeah? So when you change something in these aspects, the impact is 100 times bigger than the CO2 impact. So what he says, what we should do, according to Professor Dr. Rancourt, is we should focus on the property of the surface. And by the way, when I'm talking about the 1.4 degrees Celsius, that calculation is a calculation that has consensus among physicists, because you also have this is done on basic physics calculations. And the other one, you have many scientists with their incredibly sophisticated, complicated computer models. They have the same outcome, 1.2 to 1.4 degrees Celsius. So what did that do to me in my context of understanding things? I said, I have to go back now to the carbon narrative. So I went back to the carbon narrative. And the first thing you see, okay, is that readable for you? No? Okay, I'm going to explain it. What you see is there, when you see that pie, the gray color reflects to the effect of the CO2 on the greenhouse gases. And so the effect of, and that's from an official source, the effect of CO2 on the greenhouse gases is above 60%, 64%. And we know the greenhouse gases do impact the climate change. But then I looked at the definition of greenhouse gases, all these gases, CO2, methane, the nitrogen, and so forth. But it also mentions water vapor. And I didn't see that in this equation. So I said to myself, why is it not part of the equation? So I went further in my research as a kid, because I'm a very curious kid. And this is what I found. I found that a professor, Walter Jenner, he's also a scientist, he's a climate scientist and a microbiologist. He said, this is actually the situation in our atmosphere. The water vapor is responsible for 95% of the heat dynamics of our planet. So that means when you look at what Rancourt said, Professor Rancourt, that he said you should focus on land management, that it is answered by, also met by what Jenner says with respect to the interest of the water dynamics in our atmosphere. But he says this very specifically. As I said already, 95% of the heat dynamics are driven by water, less than 4% by CO2. Remember, in the original diagram, we were talking about 64 degrees Celsius, more or less. Now that has been reduced to 3 to 4%, max 4%. And it is the water effect that is the major responsible for the heat dynamics, according to Walter Jenner. And he sees a solution, because he said, look, if you look at the history of our planet, first we had the rocks, then came land, then came plants, and those plants eventually gave rise to the capacity of our soil to capture water, to retain water. And that, of course, gave rise to CO2 and so forth, because you capture the CO2 and you also transpire back into the atmosphere. And he said, our soil is actually a carbon sponge. So if you focus on soil, on regenerating the soil, what happens? You will capture the carbon, you will capture the water, and as an effect, it will cool down the planet. And one of the things he said is, when you will increase vegetation on our planet by 4%, it will cool down in a relative short period of time, the temperature of our Earth by 1%. When he says in opposition to that, when you do that with the CO2, it will take years, thousands of years, because the ocean is also a sink of carbon. And when you release carbon, when carbon decreases in the atmosphere, the ocean will also release CO2. So this is just to say, okay, we have some different points of view, and it also broadened my context of things. Then let's talk a little bit about the Amazon narrative. And I mentioned two quotes. I'm going to pick out the second quote because I'm a football fan, and this is a quote sent out to the world by Cristiano Ronaldo, the formidable football player. But what he said on his Instagram account, he said the Amazon rainforest produces more than 20% of the world oxygen. Okay, in my journey as a kid, I was reading a book of Michael Schellenberger titled Apocalypse Never. And he, the author and scientist, he asked to one of the leading authors of the IPCC, he asked that question. He said, what about it? Is that true? And these are not my words, but I can say it as a kid. It's bullshit, said that author. It's bullshit. It's a wash, because it is true. The Amazon is producing oxygen, but it is leveled because all the plants take the oxygen back through respiration. So it's a net effect zero. But just to show you how narratives are being created and what you read in the journals, that we just not predominantly should accept that as this is the science. Okay, then. Makes me thirsty, I'm sorry. The energy paradigm then. Okay, the pictures you see there are all the pictures from, let's say, the history of our energy development going from the wood to the most sophisticated technologies we have right now. In essence, the dynamics are as such. So you create, they all create heat in order to boil water, and that boiled water mainly is going to be shifted, and I can't even read the words because I don't have my my spectacles, but doesn't matter. It creates vapor, creates steam, and that steam goes into, creates pressure, goes into the turbines, and these turbines are housed by magnets, and through the spinning of the magnets, you are generating electricity. That's mainly the principle, yeah? It's not true for solar panels because they rely on sun. It's not true for the windmills because they do use the turbines and the magnets to produce the electricity, but don't use the boiling of the water, yeah? Okay. So then again, that little voice in my head was asking, well, since 200 years, like what has really changed when you think of those, the way energy is being created? Is this still the same thing we do mainly, boiling the water? So before I go to the next level, I'm just going to show you, this is a world map of the world electricity axis. And I'm talking here about basic electricity access. Like you can have one light in the house and you can charge one phone. That already helps more than 50% of the people in the world worldwide to have access to electricity, because that's how bad it is. Because 800 million people don't have access to electricity, and 2.8 billion people don't even have reliable power. So you could say, okay, looks good because like, okay, and then when you have the yellow color, that means you have accessibility to basic electricity. But look at Africa, it's incredible how bad the situation is over there. So having done this research and these data and having, well, some slight changes in the concept of the way I'm looking at things now, just like questioning, I said, okay, where are there some fundamentals, some building blocks that could really help our planet moving forward? And I came across an entrepreneur, Manoj Bhargava. I'm surely not pronouncing his name correctly, so I'm sorry for that. But the main thing is this. He's a billionaire, and he decided to keep 1% of his assets for himself, 99% to spend on 3 building blocks. Because he says, if you don't have water, health, or lights, then you cannot develop decently as a human individual. If you lack one of these 3, you can't have the same deployment opportunities. So he's been focusing through a company that he installed, Stage 2, to seek for solutions that could help the 50% of the people on our planet who do not have these basic needs that we consider in the West as normal. So here's the first thing. What he did, he went to villages in India and he said, after research, they come up with the first product. They came up with the first product, which is a free energy electric bike, meaning they set it in the house of those people. They don't have electricity at all. Can you imagine? And they say, look, this is your energy supply. Oh, how come? Well, ride the bike for 1 hour. You have power for 24 hours. You never need a charger because it's free energy electricity. You have energy every day. And the good thing is you can even be a little bit sportive because by 1 hour of spinning, you can have lights for 24 hours. And you know, the people, you know how they saw it? They saw it as a gadget. Oh yeah, the bike, oh, I'm going to ride it. But okay, then they were, in that process, they were thinking further because they said, okay, a bike is quite immobile. You can't take the bike and go 2 kilometers further to your family to say, hey, I'm going to generate electricity for you. That's a little bit unpractical. So then they come up what they call a free electricity power pack. And that has a built-in solar panels, built-in autonomous system that allows the people there to light their house, but also light all these appliances. You want to light your TV, laptop, phone, lights, fan, name it, you can do it. And they even extended it with, I would say the picture on the bottom with the solar panels, if you fold it together, it's like a briefcase. So that power pack with the briefcase gives you a mobility that is incredible for these people. You see them at night, they go on bike, they go further up, we're going to charge it here, electricity. It has built-in lights, also that power pack. So it gives a total solution to these people in those communities. Yeah. So that, the inventor says, the philanthropist says, that at least can help 1 billion people. So they are really scaling it up. The costs of this, and by the way, it has a 12-year guarantee. You can just throw it on the floor. It is built of very strong materials that are even bullet resistant. 12 years guarantee. It costs 130 euros. That's your investment. You have your power. How beautiful is that? The second thing he was thinking about, okay, now we're going to the agriculture, because what happens with most of the farmers over there? When you look at their cost side, you see fertilizer, seeds, pesticides, and diesel count for 98% of their earnings. Can you imagine that? So they have to live on 2%, working day in, day out, under the sun. It's not a surprise that many of the farmers commit suicide, yes, because they don't have any perspective in life. So what he did with his team is, we're going to look at how these people live and what their requirements and demands are. And one of the demands that were apparent is, okay, let's look at this cost structure. How is it composed? And they saw, okay, well, the fertilizer takes 20%. Okay, they said, if we could take out the fertilizer by 20%, we could already increase that profit from 2 to 22%. That's a 10-fold increase. But then we have to know, how can we make a fertilizer so that the farmer is no more dependent on the chemical fertilizer? And this is how they did it, because they did the research. They came up with a fertilizer. And the fertilizer is built up on 3 piles in a layered system. The first pile is just the agricultural waste. The second pile refers to the green waste, leaves. And the third pile refers to the cow dung. And if you process that in a layer system, after 18 days, they have fertilizer. What does that mean? You have fertilizer forever based on the basic materials you have available locally. You're not dependent anymore. So not only are you increasing your profit margin from 2 to 22%, but you're also increasing your produce. So it's a double effect. And the third thing, they don't have to burn their things anymore now. They can use everything. So everything has become valuable. They produce more. There's more nutrition in the soil because of the fertilizer. Water retains, more produce. This is actually a simple but a brilliant solution for these farmers. So you could apply it actually everywhere in the world. And that is what is happening, because they started with 50 farmers. And then, of course, it went viral. We live also in a social media community, so that's very advantageous. And now what happens? 400,000 farmers already are embarking up on it. They made a brochure, a booklet that they are disposing on their website, not based on lots of text, but based on images. Images so that everybody, wherever you live, you can follow it. It's available for free, and they are ready to help wherever people are. Africa is very interested in that, the whole continent, Indonesia, many other countries. Personally, I think as a kid, wow, this is fantastic. The third thing, water. One of the big problems in the world is the brackish water, because you can't do anything with it. It's a little salty, it has some minerals, but you can't use it for drinking water. Neither can you use it for agriculture. So they came up with an invention. And the invention is, okay, we have invented a machine, a filtered system that turns brackish water into drinkable water that is usable for agriculture. Fantastic. And it can be done with very limited power, only 1.5 kilowatt is required, and it goes very fast. When you attach the brackish, the filter to the well, instantly you can transform 20 to 40 liters of water per minute. So that helps incredibly. And the same they have done with the gray water. So it's ready for available use, for immediate use. So all around the world, they can have these solutions. But now, as a kid, with that little voice in my head, I'm not at the end of the story, of course. Let's go next level. Because when I saw all these examples, don't ask me why, because the way our brains sometimes work, sometimes I don't understand my own logic. So let's go to this. And I'm going to ask somebody in the public. We know this is a tree. Does anybody know what kind of tree this is? It's a jacaranda. And the jacaranda, I was in Zimbabwe in the second half of the 90s, and they were in full blossom. And I must say, it was perhaps the most beautiful tree I've ever seen in my life. Fantastic. It gave me an incredible energy, like power. It was like, I was like, yeah, floating. Yeah. So that connection made me, in my search, also discover something I saw on the internet of the local news in Harare. And what was that about? It was about a local inventor, Maxwell Chikumbutso, and he claims to have invented the first electric car running on radio frequency. Oh, that's like, wow, because I was thinking back on my Buck Rogers adventures when I was watching the science fiction. But on the other hand, it made me think of what the great inventor Nikola Tesla said like so many years ago, when he said, if you want to know the secrets of the universe, you have to look at energy, frequency, and vibration. So he came up with the invention of a car running on radio frequency. And he did the same for a drone, for a television, for what else? A cooktop, induction cooktop, even a helicopter. He could even, with a 0.5 megawatt, power 300 houses based on his what he calls his power machine. And they did a test with the welding, because two American people, they flew over to Harare, a researcher and a microelectric engineer, to test it, because 95% of these inventions are scam. Yeah, that's what they say. So they tested it to see if we are powering a number of houses, what is happening to the batteries that are there, are they consumed or not? So, and at the end, they did it with the welding. At the end of the test, they checked the batteries and they were still fully charged. Don't ask me how they do that. Even the inventor doesn't know it exactly himself. And therefore, I'm going to show you a video so that you can just see it for yourself, because he was on the national television in Harare. Oh, can't I play that video here? I can't play it? Oh, this is, because I could play it on my PowerPoint presentation. No, it can't be played? Well, that's pity, really pity. Well, anyway, you can look it up at the internet. He has been on national broadcast television, and he has been talking about his inventions. He has shown it. It looks, of course, very far-fetched. But look, for a kid, as an adult, I would say, okay, far-fetched. As a kid, I say, I want to know more about this. Yes, this is the thing. Well, then, unfortunately, it's that we can't see this video. I'm going to switch to the next thing, the power of imagination. Because when you see our brains, the red-filled part, it's like a heart. So that's maybe why I made a heart on the left side of the slide. And you look at science, you look at health, and you look at the child, the way I've been talking to you about these contexts related to, well, imagination and power and energy. Science actually is about failure, but it's also about feeling comfortable about failure in order to make progress, in order to be learning, in order to be questioning things. And this is the way, as a child, I've been looking at these things, yes? With an open mind, because as an adult, maybe I could have said, oh, I'm not really going in there. No, as a child, open-minded, failure or not, let's check it out. So it also allowed me to have some new views on narratives that I have been depicting, like the Amazon narrative or even the carbon narrative. True, not true, there's different points of view from scientists. So this is just the news I bring forward to the platform. So let's go and be creative also in the things that do not necessarily correspond to what everybody should be telling you is the absolute truth. We see that things like, for example, the simple examples of the fertilizer, of the water solutions, and even the power pack is helping thousands and even hundreds of thousands of families already around the world. And I'm thinking, when I'm talking about the brain, of a study, a book being written by Dr. Sarah Swart, a very well-known neuroscientist. And she said, look, our brain actually, our brain is wired. And when it is supposed to change, it creates stress in the mind. Stress, you get stressful. You hear it also from people, for example, who went, you have those beautiful stories of the American dream, for example, years ago, and people going from Europe to America, no dollars in their pockets, or maybe $10, and they said, but the gut to do it was bigger than the fear I had. So I had to step out of my comfort zone. I was very fearful, but I did it because I had to do it for myself. So what she says is, okay, the brain is wired, but it can also be rewired. It is very well possible to rewire this, and she also shows it and depicts in her book how it can be achieved, how it can be done, in order to use elements for positive developments for the communities, because that's where it starts, in order to embark on the potential that is even there available locally. So to end my presentation, I would say this: like the child I've been talking to you, if I can imagine, you can imagine, we can imagine. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Professor Allen, thank you for guiding us through these three key moments in history here as transformational points, but also as understanding the context of how the local is this nebulous thing that's always being constructed and reconstructed. I think if you had a fourth slide, as a slide for the future, it speaks to the challenges that Guy talks of, which is the environmental challenge. If we've seen a kind of fracture around COVID and we see what climate change may mean and the kind of technical solutions, the barriers of people to technology, to information, to systems, how we reconstruct that, what are the walls that we create. I think that these things open the question to what comes next. If I could ask both of you just to come to the front, and we have some time for some questions. Oh, sorry, could I have you on this side over here? Sorry, I saw the water and not the microphones. Thank you. Do I have anyone from the audience who would like to ask the first question? Yes. Well, just stand up and speak loudly, please. Perfect, thank you.
Question. English and Spanish and
Papiamento. Yes.
So abroad languages, the question is how does language play into these discussions of local identity? And if I may, for the second speaker, and much more specific question. So yesterday I had a chance to wander around Central Williamstown on Punda, and it's a fairly low-rise building environment, but there's a building sticking out like a temple. So I went there, and it looked to me like an abandoned casino hotel, and nothing there anymore. But the building is standing, it's very large. And, you know, I don't know what the imaginative solutions for such an environment are in terms of replacing the regeneration or something like this that's very specific to the economy of the city.
Okay, thank you very much for the interesting question. Interesting in the fact that language plays a very important role in our society. In particular, the language Papiamento, which has been focused as the Creole language and which has been seen as an important part of our identity. But in addition, you see also there is this search for learning other language as well in order to communicate with a larger audience. And that is not something of now when people are focusing on expressing, speaking English or Spanish, but that has been for long. I remember as a small girl going to school, which is not so long ago, we were taught different language at school in order to communicate. We were taught Spanish, English, Dutch, of course, and even French. So that was this ability to be able to communicate in different languages, which nowadays people are also inculcated as being part of our national identity, the ability to be able to communicate in different language next to having that part of the Papiamento, which is our identity, of course, but next to it also being able to communicate in different language. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, maybe a little bit too loud. Okay, I know exactly the building you're talking about in the center of the city, next to the Prime Minister's office. The how's it called again? Yeah. On the Valk, yeah. And it was a hotel, yeah. And as I said, I don't know what's going to happen with that building, but we do know that in the world, okay, they're starting with their process of greening cities and covering rooftops and paying a lot of attention to parks, and because of, well, CO2, but also the cooling effect, because when during a hot summer day, when you're in a city that has no green at all, I somewhere read that even temperature could be 7% higher than compared to a city where you have these green areas and green rooftops. If you would talk about how would you imagine such a building then? Well, maybe that building would have different layers, but not only with agricultural developments, but also with science attached to it. That could maybe even be a lab for developments in the region, to see how such a building could be converted in something that is, well, having a cooling agricultural effect in the city. Of course, you need then scientists, and in that perspective, for example, it would be interesting because we have different views. Scientists have different views on there is climate change. Okay, it's not about neglecting that, because it is there. And even when I was talking about those two professors, the physicist Dr. Rancourt and Walter Jenner, although they said concentrate on the land management, they do differ because Jenner says you should do it right now, influence that sponge and attracting the CO2 in the ground and so forth, the regeneration, while Rancourt says, oh, he differs. But a practical thing could be, for example, okay, why not having an open public discussion with several scientists, but also with the grassroots, the people from here, because nobody knows better than the people from here how the soil is, the soil of the island. They know what the problems are because they are confronted with it day after day. They know how it came that, well, the nutrients are not there anymore since a long time already. These are just a couple of suggestions. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. We have a question from the back.
Thank you very much. I'm Francisco Villarreal. I'm from the Continental University in Peru and the Universidad de Buenos Aires in Argentina. So I cannot avoid quoting Thomas Hobsbawm with the invention of tradition for the first speaker, which actually Eric refers to the idea that this tension that you refer is to some extent an imposition of the 19th century states to spread this sort of nationalism. And also, I remember the mythology. A mythology said that nationalism is indeed this sort of mythology, no? So to what extent would you say, for the first speaker, the question is, to what extent would you say that this tension that you refer is not a inference of this dialectics between this vertical imposition by the states and the local culture? And for the second question, I remember Julio Cortázar, an Argentine writer, he was a senile boy, soy niño senil. So there is a very nice, dialectics between being old and being young. And the question, sorry, is, I remember Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn said that each paradigm, Feyerabend also, an epistemologist, Feyerabend also said that each paradigm brings its own solutions and its own problems. So wouldn't you say that those problems aren't part or aren't an inference of your own paradigm, and they may be not perceived as a problem for third paradigms? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your interesting question. In regards to the dialectics, the aspect of dialectics, indeed, I think when you look at the event of the 30th May, that has been very clearly put, the dialectics between those who have and those who do not have, the dialectics, the power dynamics which are present in the society. So I did not mention, in fact, about the dialectics, but it does play a role. If you put it in that concept of theory, it does play a role in that. Furthermore, in the course of time, you'll see that constantly discussion on who we are and who we want to be, based on who we were. So the dialectics is also mentioned in that aspect as well, more within a historical context of who we want to be or who we were, who we want to be placed within a historical context. So regarding your first question, the dialectics is there. If you look at it within the concept of the dialectic situation and dialectic position between power relationship and those who do not have the power. It is there, and it is constantly being showed in the discussion. The narratives constantly show those discussion and invocation on that. And I think one of my recommendation is that we should look at these dialectics as this confrontation between power relationship. We should look at those when we are dealing with issues which has to do with national belonging and national identity, and also our position within globalization and how we would like to go further, because we are being influenced, of course, on by global development, but it means indeed that we have to position ourselves also to have a clear understanding of where we are, where we do want to go, and in order to come with certain solution. Yes.
It is on. Is this working? Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Judith. I come from the University of California, Riverside. And actually, my question very nicely ties in with what my colleague asked. I was kind of interested. This is a question for Professor Alan. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Rosemary Allen, yeah.
I really liked your presentation, really enjoyed it. And I was interested in sort of like on the other side of that dialectic that we were just talking about. And I am curious about whether your work does go into sort of like community proposals, non-institutionalized proposals, right? So for instance, like any sort of like artist, me, myself, I work on graffiti. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that community, non-institutional aspect of the community making, the nation building, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. As an anthropologist, I'm very much interested in this type of expression, the expression from the communities. I know, for example, that some anthropologists, Iteke Witteveen and Leon Weber, have done research on the development, what they call the culture within the communities, the grassroots culture, and how they deal with issues as national identity and identity. Nowadays, we have, for example, neighborhoods who are organizing tour within the neighborhoods, whereby they are looking at authentic or looking at cultural expression within the neighborhood, within their own neighborhood. And this has opened up a broader view of what lives within the communities, what are their heritage, and how they can put the knowledge on heritage also in working. So you see at sometimes that globalization also advocates the fact that people are more and more searching for themselves, searching for things which in fact distinguish them from another person in sense. And you see that happening very much in neighborhood sectors, and which is, I think, a very positive development taking place. So tomorrow, when you're going to Scalo and Fleur de Marie, you will see this development taking place, how the old traditional aspect of neighborhood is being influenced, but also connected with new ideas and new developments. So this combination of old and new, traditional and global, is very much present there. Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question? While you think of one, Gia, I've got a question for you just about the local context here. Again, I was having, we were talking at lunch the other day about the petrol refinery, gasoline refinery here, you know, and the tension between jobs and green industry. I just wondered if you could tell our group a little bit about the things you know about this, you know, tension between economic development of, you know, planet destroying inputs and alternatives that have been coming up here on here in Curacao?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't consider myself an expert in that, just to be to set the stage. Okay, if you, on the one hand, the refinery that has been here since decades and has been incredibly important for the island for job creation, and now having it well out of operation, as we still talk today. I know there's negotiations going on, but I'm not aware of that, of the content of the dynamics. Ideally, as a country, you would say, whatever country it is, ideally you would say, if we would not have to pay money for the import of fossils, that would be the best solution ever. I say ideally. Now you have also to meet the current dynamics, and when I showed you the chart of the world access to electricity, for example, you saw the African continent that has very limited access to electricity. If you would say there, okay, to these people there, and you have to lower your CO2 footprint, then they will ask you, are you bananas or what? Because their first concern is they need the wood to create the heat, to make dinner, supper. So that's a basic need. How, if they don't have access to electricity, other electricity forms, how could you immediately then go to already maybe a renewable installation that may take and may cost a lot of money for that thing? By the way, we know that when we talk about renewables, it is true that from the output side, because that's also context that I had to learn myself. Renewables, we talk about like, okay, no CO2 emissions, which is right when you look at it from the output side. Sun, okay, no CO2 emissions. Wind, perfect. But you also can ask a question, how have they been produced in the first place? We know that the solar panels from China are being produced with very dirty coal. We know that the coal production has been going up in these days like never before. We also know that the use of wood as fuel has never been higher than right now. So there's lots of dynamics going on there, and there's more than one way to skin a cat, and you have to look, of course, for a solution that could be suitable, hopefully not only in the short run, but also in the long run, because that's, of course, the pressure also for the people who are in charge. And we have the pressure towards our community, how we could serve the community. And with the critics that are out there, it's very easy to say, okay, you've done the wrong job, because by finally closing the refinery, another 600 people don't have any income in a country that's already suffering a lot under financial pressure. And just to give an idea, that's maybe why you have that tension between, because Curacao, like my colleague said, is under the scrutiny of the Netherlands through that organization of Coho, busy doing applying to they call it measures that should improve the financial situation. But if you ask people and organizations to be more restrained, then on the one hand, as a government, you are not able to invest really in the economy when you say this is the complete focus. We have to reorganize, and we have to be in mandate to comply with these rules. On the other hand, you want to stimulate economic growth, economic development. So if you are pushing too much on the pure financial part, you may lose future economic growth and development, and then even be worse off. And that's, by the way, something that the president also of the central bank said. He said, it should be in line. We should need to find a path where all the measures being taken go hand in hand with measures to stimulate economic growth. And this is maybe the most important thing for Curacao, for communities. What is the direction of the economy for the next 10, 20 years? In what kind of sectors do we really want to develop our activities that create value for the local people? Not only foreign direct investments that suck out the money out of the country. Every investor wants to make money. Nothing wrong about that, very good. But investors also, when they are here, that come here because they really want to see the community grow.
Mm-hmm. Yes, oh, sorry, yes, please.
I'm Randy Massengale from Seattle University and Delta Dental of Arkansas. And Guy, I was wondering, in flying in, I saw about 15 wind turbines on the coast. And I'm seeing, speak to that project and how that is helping the local economy.
Okay. You know, the funny thing is, I'm originally from Belgium. And there was a company also involved in that project. I believe it was a company, Aspiravi, back in the days. To my knowledge, the wind energy contributes to, was it 20-25% of the total electricity supply? Of course, you have wind here the whole year through, as good as. Not in the very warm months that are starting right now, so you're not very lucky now. Because July, August, and September are the hottest months. So in the other months you have like more wind, but it is contributing to the energy mix, and they are working on it. One of the things, the challenges, of course, with wind energy, as I've also read in that book, for example, from Michael Schellenberger, is the density of the energy. Yeah, the energy density. For example, fossil fuels and the oil and the other, and the oil and the gas have, for example, a much higher density than the wind turbines. But okay, it's, of course, I can imagine when you come in by plane that you really see them as a colossal view on your spectrum. Yeah.
So yes, I'd just like to thank our two opening speakers. I think the challenge of the local comes together with the idea of full recognition, you know, how identity gives a sense of purpose in individual personhood, but also in collective identities. But at the same time, we cannot forget the question of economic justice. And those things need to be able to come together in a way that meets each other and that doesn't contest each other. Sometimes we misdiagnose identity difference as economic difference and vice versa. And as we look to the imagination of what the local is going forward and the challenges of what the climate will bring us, I really think you have posed some critical questions for us and really opened up our minds in a beautiful way. So thank you to you both. A round of applause. Okay, so again, just a little reminder about what we're going to do next. So from here, we are going to the talking circles, and you'll see in your program that the talking circles, each of them are in a different room. So if you're interested in organizational diversity and community diversity and governance, we'll be in S102. I'm going to explain what this means in a second. If you're interested in identity and belonging, education and learning in worlds of difference, you'll be in S101. If you are interested in the special focus, you'll be in Q203. And if you're a Spanish speaker, we have room R101. Again, so each of those letters is a different building block. We have some students outside who will help guide us out there. So it's either the S block, the Q block, or the R block, and the indicator of the number is the floor. So, and we will guide you over there. And then after the talking circles, we have the Spanish language plenary session back in this room, and the English parallel sessions begin. If you have any questions, please come and talk to me or Tamsin. Yes, I think we're on our way. Thank you, everyone.